Hi everyone, welcome to the We Vote EFF Manifesto Review episode. This episode has taken me a significantly longer amount of time to prepare and make than most other videos. I've reshot it over and over again. I've reviewed my own review, trying to make sure that it's a quality review that you could be happy with, that is fair, that is objective, that is informative, and one that can really help you make a decision. Because that's really what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to push propaganda. I'm not trying to push a particular party. Whatever personal preferences I have, that's not the purpose of this show. The purpose of the show is to help you make an informed decision. So the EFF did their manifesto launch on the 2nd of February. It was an impressive event, but I've spent the last 7 days really going over back and forth with this document. I wasn't really happy with some of the stuff that I saw being done by the mainstream, serious, trained journalists, because I found that a lot of their stuff was lazy. A lot of their stuff was just either overly ridiculing the EFF or overly focusing on one little manifesto point that they particularly cared about, that they thought made for interesting TV. So you watch the reviews and all of that, but you don't come away with the holistic feeling of what the EFF manifesto is about. So I'm going to try to give you that. I'm going to try to make it as short as possible. I'm going to try to make it as comprehensive as possible and take you through the journey of the EFF manifesto. All right, so the structure of the EFF manifesto is such that it has this opening by Julius Malema. It then goes into their achievements since the inception of the EFF. It goes through a diagnosis of the problems that are facing South Africa, and in that diagnosis you begin to see what the EFF is prioritizing and caring more about, and then it finally goes into this 28 discrete targets of what are they going to do in particular policy areas, and it starts off with land and it ends off in international relations. There's a section on gender, there's a section on LGBTIAQ challenges facing the country, and that just gives you an idea of the mix. So not all of those sections have the same amount of attention, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So one thing I want to say from the jump in terms of the writing style. Now this is a lengthy document, and everybody has been emphasizing that it's 168 pages or 170 depending on which version you have. If you have the digital version, it's 170. If you have the paperback version, it's 168. But I actually saw that a lot of people hadn't paid closer attention to the document, because I mean they should have pointed out that it's 168 pages, but 36 of those pages are just pictures, either Malema on a tractor or pictures of settlements or something to that effect. 36 of those pages are pictures, and 14 of those pages are just lists of places where the EFF wants to do a particular thing. So what the EFF does is they'll say, hey, in education, we want to do a certain number of things and we'll do them in these areas, and then they'll just list them out, you know? And what that does for 14 whole pages is that it creates this additional volume to the book, which makes it more girthy, you know, and I see why the EFF would want to do that. Because one, when you're on TV holding the document, it looks more voluminous, it looks more robust as an effort, and secondly, then you can also laugh at the ANC and say, well, your document is 68 pages or something to that effect. So there is definitely a PR element to the way the document was done, and I want you to be aware of it, because actually they've benefited from journalists just saying it's 170 pages and so on and so forth, but it actually isn't 170 pages, it's 118 pages of substantive matter, and then obviously 50 pages of stuff which is just there for enhancement of the document. And if you're a BA student or a law student or anybody who's ever been in those fields of study, you know sometimes how people will do this kind of thing, you know, in pursuit of the word count. It does have some typos. A lot of them are not killer typos. They're not the kind of typos that would keep you away or make you turn away from the document as a poorly written document. But there are some that stand out, which make me wonder about how many people proofread this document, how many people were involved in the actual drafting. One of those typos, the most significant for me, just says the EFF will implement legislation, full stop. And that's all that the bullet point says. What legislation? No idea. So, I mean, I don't understand how people would have missed that kind of a mistake. There's a few others, but in total, I spotted maybe 10 typos. So I would say it's a well-written document. I would have liked it for it to have no typos whatsoever, because I don't know if you remember with Bonang, those kind of things can sink your ship. I mean, it's not a Bonang type of document. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. What I am saying though is that I would have preferred that if it had none of those typos. Right, so let's look through the 4 areas that I think that this manifesto can fairly be divided into. Number 1 is their ideology. Number 2, their plan for jobs. Number 3, their social plan. And number 4, how they will pay for everything. I think if you break down the EFF manifesto into those 4 headings, you should be fine in terms of understanding everything that they stand for and understanding whether or not you fucks with their constitution, or sorry, their manifesto, right? So just what is the ideology of the EFF? In a nutshell, I can tell you that the ideology of the EFF is that it is a socialist party, it is a pan-Africanist party, it is a party that locates itself in the global south and the politics of the global south, and it's a party that is opposed to the hegemony of the West, the economic, cultural, and social hegemony of the West, which includes countries like the United States of America, countries within the EU, and other countries affiliated with that cultural and economic dominance. So that's how the EFF defines themselves. In terms of the local South African politics, you can get a lot of the feel from the 7 cardinal pillars of the EFF, which include the expropriation of land without compensation, the nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy, the building of state and government capacity so as to lead to the eventual abolishment of tenders, the provision of free education, healthcare, housing, and sanitation, the building of these massive industrial protected economic centers wherein you'll be able then to grow the manufacturing capacity of the state, the expansion of the African economy, and an open and accountable government. So corrupt-free government. So that's where you can get a feel for a more grounded, detailed layout of what the EFF's socialist, pan-African, anti-West positioning is. But just realize that is where those 7 cardinal pillars come from. That is the fundamental academic body of work that influences the EFF ideological positioning, that comes from scholars such as Frantz Fanon, that comes from such scholars such as Marcus Garvey, Steve Biko, and several other leaders of the Black intellectual project, if you will. So having said all of that, it's also important to note that in the particular manifesto, the EFF rejects the 1994 compacts that the ANC entered into with the various players that it did in order to achieve the post-1994 peace, which we've all been living under, but that has led to certain disadvantages, one of which is the economic disadvantages. So they reject CODESA agreements. They reject pragmatic deals which were made in order to secure the peace. One of those was the establishment of provinces. So the IFP and the Nationalist Party, who were covertly in bed together, wanted provinces because they envisioned a situation where they would be able to run those. So some people within the Nationalist Party were maybe envisioning that they could eventually take over the Western Cape, maybe Pretoria, and the IFP thought that it would be in charge of KZN. So they pushed for the establishment of provinces, and to keep the peace and keep the ball rolling, the ANC agreed. The EFF rejects that. It rejects the kind of economic transactions that were entered into, where they kind of like agreed to pull back on economic reforms that were aggressive so as to not make the markets panic, etc., etc. The EFF rejects all of that. Implied in that is rejection of the TRC and all of the 1994 compacts that come up quite a bit. And the EFF actually makes a very, very clear decision that they prefer transformative approaches to social justice versus affirmative approaches to social justice. Now, a transformative approach to social justice is one that seeks to restructure the order of the society to achieve participatory parity, which is equality of play or equity of play for all of the members in the social order. Whereas affirmative social justice policies are one that seek to have inclusion of people who are marginalized or ostracized, or who have their powers and dignity reduced. So what it seeks to do is to increase how much they are recognized and also increase their participation in the space. So the ANC has chosen affirmative social justice economic model, whereas the EFF has chosen a transformative first. It does also have elements of recognition and affirmation in it, but it isn't first and foremost a document that seeks to create affirmative model. It's one that seeks to go for a transformative measure. And this all comes from a lot of critical studies, academic theory. Some of the leaders are Nancy Fraser. There are other scholars who've led that conversation, but this particular one, Nancy Fraser, is one of the most prominent theorists who's been pushing this form of thought. So that is the ideological underpinning of the EFF manifesto. So let's talk about the EFF jobs plan. The EFF in their manifesto has said that they are focusing on land and jobs now. But in reality, their manifesto actually focuses more on jobs and the economy than it does on land. There are 2 pages in the manifesto on land, 3 pages on mining, and 20-something pages on the economy, youth development, jobs, tax collection, banking reform, all of those things which are ultimately aimed at the creation of jobs, and jobs for the majority, and high quality jobs with strong labor rights and a strong position for the unions. So here's basically the plan at a business level in terms of what does the EFF want to do. Number one, they want to have beneficiation of local minerals. They want to expand the agricultural and fishing industry, expand their manufacturing capacity, make sure that those particular industries are exporting into Africa. They want to have, and this is their signature project, this is the main strategic calculus of the EFF, is that they're going to have the special economic zones which have protections for them, which is basically tariffs or some kinds of prohibitions on imports. And then those particular specific, special economic zones will have to employ 2,000 people to qualify. Those 2,000 people will have to have pensions. There will be tax-free economic zones, and they will receive support from the state for building. And basically this is based on the Chinese model, because China actually, like early in the 70s, created these special economic zones. Shenzhen is one of the most famous ones, where 90% of the production of electronic equipment happens currently globally. And it's located, there's like a strip of water separating Shenzhen and Hong Kong, but it's located in that particular area if you're interested in the geographical positioning on the map. But basically the Chinese establishment of special economic zones was one that was the principal strategy to their success, because China was able to attain economic growth, massive economic growth, which is what the EFF wants, through the establishment of these special economic zones. And it seems that this is the model and the idea that the EFF wants to replicate. Here's how China did it. They had the special economic zones, they had cheap labor, they had very, very loose labor laws, if you will. So it was able to make people work for cheap hours, for very, very long hours, right? Another thing that China did is that they actually did not pay any heed to global intellectual property laws. They did not pay heed to trademarks. They just basically conducted a massive economic and corporate espionage of all of the different global players. Basically, China cheated in the sense that they were able to accelerate the quality of their merchandise and production by copying everybody else, and sometimes illegitimately doing so. And then they also manipulated their currency. So those things were able to allow China to produce goods and services at a very, very cheap rate. And where they were very, very strong global competitors, where I'm talking here about Amazon, Uber, Facebook, Google, what China then did was just to prevent those people from accessing their markets, supporting local competitors and creating local alternatives for those particular products. So there's no Amazon that is really operating in China, no Uber, no Facebook. no Google. So of those FANG companies, none of them actually have much of a presence except for Apple, which obviously has factories in China, etc. But China's able to do that because they have 1 billion people and they can kick you out of the market. So South Africa wants to do this plan under the EFF model. That's what they think will achieve it. And then in addition, they want to do state procurement and then use that procurement to support small businesses, because the state is one of the biggest customers in any economy. And lastly, they want to have purchasing quotas. So the state will buy 80% locally produced stuff, and then businesses and shops and etc. will have to sell 60% locally procured stuff. And then investment bankers will have to invest 30% of the money that they're using in investment in production-based local businesses. This is the EFF policy idea about how do they actually create jobs. And what they then say is that they'll be able to obtain a growth of 6% having done this, and then that growth will then move from 6% after the first 2 years to 10%. I want to offer some critique to this particular idea and way of structuring the economy. So number one, the EFF wants to replicate the Chinese model, but they don't want to replicate the Chinese model in its totality. What do I mean by that? They don't want cheap labor. They don't want loose labor regulations. They're not obviously going to be able to violate trademarks and perform economic espionage the way that China was able to do, and they haven't spoken about any currency manipulation in terms of reducing the cost of goods and services that come out of South Africa, because that would require devaluing of the rand, which a lot of South Africans don't want or seek. In Africa, sometimes when your currency starts devaluing, you can't stop that spiral, and then you end up having a situation with massive hyperinflation. So the EFF doesn't want to do these things, and yet at the same time, they are saying that they will then be able to attract investors who will come to South Africa, make these particular, special economic zone factories in townships, in rural areas where they may not readily have access to the rest of the developmental structures they need to get their products out and shipped to the world. I don't actually think that this is going to be an attractive deal for investors. I don't think it's going to bring in new players, because people are still going to be competing with China, with Bangladesh, with South Korea, with Japan, and all of these places are using the economies of scale, automation, etc. And China now is even taking their manufacturing prowess to the next level with this Silk Road initiative, where they are creating this supply network globally, where they'll be able to supply the world quicker with the goods and services that they produce. So going against China directly using this particular strategy doesn't seem to me to be one that will be effective. So if you were to ask me, the benefication I think is going to work. The agro and fishing manufacturing growth is going to work. I don't think the special economic zones are going to work. They're a signature policy of the EFF in this manifesto. I think that particular idea fails. Other ideas I didn't mention is the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund. I think that's going to work, but this particular one, I don't think it's going to work. But the EFF also has a plan for raising funding outside of this manufacturing thing that they want to do. Also, just before I move on, I don't think you're going to be able to enforce a procurement quota for shops to sell 60% of locally made goods, because if you succeed, the goods that they'll be able to sell will be very expensive and people won't be able to afford them, which will hurt the economy. Or you'll just push up the cost of the goods that people buy. They'll start buying stuff off Amazon, pay the taxes, etc., and then have less money. This is not a Hlaudi Motsoeneng type of policy in terms of the 90% local content, but it can have a similar impact. And for that reason, I'm not particularly enthused by the EFF economic model. They do have a tax plan though, and I want to get into that tax plan now. The EFF tax plan is that they will stop illicit outflows. Illicit outflows contribute 900 billion of lost revenue to the country every year. They want to have wealth tax increases, capital gains tax increase, corporate tax increase, inheritance tax increase. They want to remove spousal support for government officials, you know, like the wives who get benefits, etc. They want to remove deputy ministers. All of that is going to lead to a saving of revenue in this way or that way. And if you look, I'm trying to put up all the numbers so you can read them for yourselves. They also want to remove provinces, and then that obviously remove certain layers and government officials altogether, saving a significant amount of money. One of the things they want to do that's going to like not add to their revenue base but decrease it is the reduction of VAT from 15% back down. So some of those things I think you can execute with a high level of success. You can definitely collect a lot of corporate tax if you do raise the corporate tax rate. However, reducing illicit trade outflow is not that easy. Even though there's 900 billion that is going out of the country, a lot of that is done legally by these multinationals because they've located their headquarters in these you know, offshore state account type of things where basically they claim tax that side where they're being taxed like at a 9% and avoid paying your 25 or 30 or 40% tax depending on whatever country it is. It's a global phenomena. These massive multinationals have been able to game the system because they've lobbied, they've gotten favorable laws towards themselves. So when the EFF says that they're going to recoup all of that money, I think even though they may be earnest in saying it, I don't think that they'll really be able to recoup all of the money, especially in the short to medium term. I think that this kind of thing requires the global financial structure to restructure the laws around how finances move globally in order for small countries such as South Africa to benefit from this. So the EFF claims that they'll be able to double the amount of revenue that they raise to fund their social programs by doing this. I don't actually think that they'll be able to do so. I don't think that it's a realistic tax collection plan, although I do think that they will be able to get some money from raising the corporate tax rate. Then the question then becomes, will those corporates then downsize if there is a larger tax base, collected from them? And I think this is one of the reasons why the ANC has been unwilling to increase the corporate tax rate, because it could have a trickle-down effect of people getting fired. And then now you got more people who are either unemployed or now are on the welfare system, which you're trying to actually reduce over time to increase the participation in the economy. So my assessment of the EFS tax plan is that some of it will work, some of it won't work. Now, socially, what does the EFF actually want to do? Let's talk about their social program a little bit. The social plan of the EFF is that they want to double social grants. I don't actually think that this is as expensive as people have made it seem to be. I think there's no problem with that. Even the DA wants to double some of the social grants. I don't think that's actually something which is something to worry about. But then they also want to provide free tablets to high school kids. There's 13 million high school kids. So providing everyone with free tablets, even if those tablets are going at 1,000 Rand, which they're not, that adds at a 1,000 Rand level, it adds 13 billion to the budget, and that's a lot of money. And then they also want to provide free tablets to university students, free laptops to university students. That can add up to 6 billion. They want to, you know, have this idea of swimming pools and grass fields and 2 pitches at every school, and there's over 24,000 schools in South Africa according to the Department of Education data. They want to have computer labs. They want to provide 3 gigabytes of data every month to every university student, for example. I don't think those things are actually cost effective, because even if you're using 100 rands, there's 2 million students in the university system. They want to give everyone who doesn't live on res, which is about 80 to 90% of those students, all of them then get 3 gigabytes of data a month. That can easily add another 3 billion to your budget, you know, in terms of like the annual budget. So these things add up, and I don't think that all of them are necessary, and I'll tell you why right now. But other things that the EFF wants to do, they want 24-hour clinics, they want to in-source labor, and I think, okay, those things actually are not bad ideas. They want to have satellite police stations. They want to expand the police force by 100,000 people. What is the cost of expanding the police force by 100,000 people? About 18 billion using the average salary of a police officer. So those costs would have to be covered by you know, the revenue collection and the business expansion of the EFF, and I've already had a conversation about that. I just want to say something though about some of these social things that have been identified. The EFF has come up with the strategy of giving tablets, blah, blah. Even the ANC has spoken about that. But I really want to say the tablets themselves, in and of themselves, are not intrinsic to the learning of coding, of maths, of anything else. They are nice to have, but they're not intrinsic to the pursuit of science. And you can learn science without necessarily owning a tablet or even a laptop. So what am I trying to put across? I'm trying to say that why not, rather than doing this or suggesting this, come up with a middle of the road approach? Computer centers. Why not have computer centers in every community? Rather than trying to have a swimming pool at every school or like 2 grass fields or 2 pitches, there are already community centers with soccer pitches and all of that. Why not improve and enhance those and build a swimming pool? 1 swimming pool per big community where the school kids can come and swim, and then you can maybe raise revenue from the community while the kids are not there or on weekends or whatever. Because that would be more cost effective than trying to literally put a swimming pool at every school. And nowadays, I mean, kids who want to take part in this kind of stuff, they can join sports club, etc., and pursue their interest in those particular disciplines without necessarily the school directly providing them. And I think some of the guys who are coming up with this manifesto were thinking, oh yeah, these private schools have all of these things. Private schools have a lot of these things, but not everyone uses them. A lot of times private schools will have hockey, cricket, tennis, squash, etc. But if you were to ask the average student who went there, they probably did 1 or 2 things while they were in that private school during that time. So I don't think that there's a necessity to provide everyone with free tablets, free laptops, swimming pools, grass fields. All of these things, I think, were additions to the manifesto that were not properly considered and then allowed for people who wanted to criticize the manifesto to quickly run here and then say, look at all of these things, and these things are problematic. I want to make an exception though of one thing that I think it's absolutely okay to do, which is the 1 million rand reward, or whatever you want to call it, to people who enroll for a PhD. There aren't enough people enrolling for PhDs because the incentives for them to just go into the workplace and start making money are so much more than them staying through a master's, where they probably will be making a pittance on tutorial, stipends and stuff like that. So for them to get through the honors and the masters and actually get to the PhD, they will have had to forego making money in the market for 3 years, sometimes 4 years. So I don't think there's a problem in giving a final destination reward to increase the body of academic literature that is coming from PhDs at a South African level. I don't think everyone will take that up. Maybe it's 100 people who take it up, it's 100 million. If it's 1,000 people who take it up, it's 1 billion. Not the biggest addition to the budget. However, trying to provide free tablets to 13, and I probably mispronounced that number, like it sounds so fine in my head, but every time I say it sounds wrong, 13 million people is not going to be something that's cost effective every year. I don't think that kind of a manifesto edition was one that was reasonable or well thought out. So let's score the EFF now. What's the final score? What's the scoreboard looking like at the end of this? For clarity and relevance, remember I spoke about they need to be clear on ideology, on assumptions, on growth, and all of the things that they're assuming, the global economy, the revenue that they're going to collect. I think that some of the stuff is vague, but we can give the EFF 7 out of 10 on clarity within their manifesto. In terms of the specifics, their goals, their aims, their strategies, all of the stuff that they want to do in order to achieve the South Africa they envision, I think we can give them 7 out of 10. Right? 7 out of 10 for that. In terms of pragmatics, can it be done? Do we have the legal authority? Do we have the budget? Can this work in the global reality that we live in? Their manifesto, I'm going to have to give it 5 out of 10. In terms of creativity, how many new ideas do they have? How many old ones are they recycling? How much body of academic support exists in this document? Obviously, this document is written for the man on the street, so it's not going to have like footnotes and references and all that. But can we actually see that this is founded on some kind of academic thinking? I'm going to have to give the EFF 6 out of 10 on the creativity front. In terms of the team, now the EFF outlines in their manifesto some of the achievements that they've had. They fought Jacob Zuma, paid back the money. They fought the Guptas. They were instrumental in the removal of Jacob Zuma. They strengthened the office of the public protector. They fought for land to become a central talking point within the South African landscape. They fought for insourcing of workers in universities, in spaces like the metros where they are working. They fought for these 24-hour clinics. All of these things are true about the EFF. So the EFF has done a lot of good work in that respect. But the EFF also has an Achilles heel, which is the history of its leadership. So some people are still very concerned about Dalimpofu's involvement within the SABC and what that means in terms of his credibility, even though he's done great work with the Marikana miners and several other cases where he has been stellar. Some people have those concerns, and I would not be an honest person if I didn't raise them as well, in terms of the EFF may still need to address those, maybe in the short to medium term, but generally those things would have to be addressed. Some people have concerns about Julius Malema and Floyd Shivambu's involvement in the ANC Youth League's finances, because a lot of accusations which have never been properly ventilated are that there was massive mismanagement of those finances by those two men. People are concerned about, Julius Malema's acquisition of wealth in Limpopo, and that how he was part of the cabal influencing and channeling tenders left, right and center, because he did end up owing the taxman 16 million, and it's unclear how much money he made personally from all the behind the scenes tender handshakes, etc., etc. There are even some concerns about Floyd Shivambu's management of finances dating way back to his days when he was still on SRC. Well, some of those allegations have never been properly addressed or ventilated. Personally, I don't buy the VBS stuff because I haven't seen sufficient evidence. Only one journalist has been able to say she saw something, and nobody has been independently able to corroborate it. I'm willing to be proven wrong about VBS, but I don't include VBS in my list of concerns. However, the EFF does have a lot of noise around the VBS issue. Even though it's diminishing, it still exists to some extent. The EFF also has a branding challenge in that sometimes they are viewed as being overly aggressive. Floyd's confrontation with the journalist, the gentleman who was slapping that white police officer after the State of the Nation address, all of those things fit into a specific narrative about the EFF, and it may be what may worry people that the EFF is going to have a heavy-handed approach to governing the state, and that they'll be violent or have a proclivity to violence towards people who disagree with them. However, also in terms of discussing the team, the EFF is the only political party that has been able to maintain a coherent leadership structure for the last 5 years. The DA has been squabbling. The ANC has had so many ups and downs, and it's always been a factional entity ever since Jacob Zuma really stepped onto the scene. So the ANC is a very fragmented and divided party, but the EFF has shown that they're united, they're able to execute on a variety of things, that they're able to maintain a coherent leadership structure. So having said all of that, I give the EFF a 6 out of 10 in terms of their team, maybe a 6.5, but I don't think I'd go so far as to give them a 7. So that takes us to an overall score of, what is it? Let me work it out now. So we got 7. Then we have 7. Then we got 5. Then we have 6 and 6. So that's 12. That's 14. So that's 26. 26 plus 5 is 31, and that takes us to an overall score of 62% for the EFF manifesto. So I would say that this manifesto is satisfactory, but this manifesto is not a document that is practical, and as a result of that, it has some shortcomings. And I think 6 is a fair assessment of that document. If you don't agree, please let's talk about it in the comments. Let me know where you stand. Let me know where you're pushing back. Let me know what your thoughts are. I mean, I would love to hear from you. This has been my viewpoint, and I hope you can take it from the perspective that I try to take a lot of time to do it, and to do it the right way, and I hope you appreciate it. That's all we have time for in this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a bit longer, but I've tried to really be as comprehensive as I can be, give you an idea where this manifesto is at, and then the final decision on whether you like it or not, or score it higher or lower, is yours, because you are the voter. Thanks for watching. This has been We Vote.